Rabosai, we're on Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, and we started a sugya called Soras Bito Mima'enes, the strange combination where we have Bito and we have Miyud, and then we have Tzara. And this all plays out to the mitzvah of Yibum. So let's just go over the case. See if we remember. Let's see. We have Reuven and Shimon, two brothers, and Reuven has a daughter. We'll call her Sarah. And she's a Ketana. Reuven marries her off to Yitzchak, and that's Ishus Doraisa. And then Yitzchak dies. Now, Reuven marries off that same Sarah to his brother Shimon. So that means an uncle is marrying his aunt, which is fine. But it's Kedushay Ketana, and this is only Kedushay D'Rabbanan. Why is this only Kedushay D'Rabbanan? After all, the father married her off. When he married her off to Yitzchak, it was Kedushay Torah. But now, once he marries her off, she leaves the domain of her father. And now she becomes what we call Yisoma B'chayavim. That's our halachic concept. That you could be an orphan by your father, so to speak, even though your father's alive and well. Now here, we tried to add a little bit. We didn't find any basis for this in the text, but the father now is no worse than her brother. So even though he doesn't play the role of the father, where the Torah says, as Biti Nasat Nisha said, that a father can marry off his daughter, he's already married her off and he lost that power, that dominion. But nevertheless, he's not worse than her brother or her mother. And they can marry her off in a Kedushay D'Rabbanan. And a Kedushay D'Rabbanan is Kedushay Miyud, which means at any point, she could be Mema'enes. Now, as long as Shimon, her husband, is still alive, and she's a Ketana, she could have been Mema'enes. But Lois Pika, she didn't get a chance to do so during the life of Shimon. Now, Shimon is married not only to Sarah, but also to another woman named Rivka. Shimon dies without children. And his two wives fall for even to Reuven, his living brother. One of them is Sarah, who is Reuven's daughter. So that's how you get Bito into the picture. The other is at Sarah to Bito. However, if we analyze this situation from a Doraisa perspective, there's no reason in the world why Rivka shouldn't fall for Yibum. Why we should block the possibility of Reuven being the Yabne and Rivka. And the reason for that is because she's not at Sarah's Bito. Why isn't she at Sarah's Bito? After all, Shimon was married to both Sarah and Rivka, who are now falling for Yibum in front of Reuven. Reuven is Sarah's father, so l'chora you would say that Rivka is Sarah's Aviyah, Sarah's Ereva. No, the answer is she's not Sarah's Ereva because Sarah was never married to Shimon. Well, what do you mean she wasn't married to Shimon? Reuven married her off to Shimon. Yes, but the moment that Shimon dies, and now she falls for Yibum, I'm talking about Sarah to Reuven, her father, she's Mema'enes. She obviously is not interested in a relationship with her father. So therefore, that miyun, and here's another principle that underlies this sugya, is oker the kedushin l'mafreya. It's as if they were never married. So in truth, from a halachic perspective, Sarah and Shimon were never married because the miyun to Reuven on the part of Sarah removes the marriage that Reuven himself was an accomplice to Shimon. And that marriage is now nullified. You know, you talk about nullification of marriages, I think in other religions and maybe even in secular, legal cases, something called to annul a marriage. In halacha, there's no such thing as an annulment of a marriage other than what we call t'nai. There's such a thing called a condition, and there's also mekatos. Both are very similar. But here's a case of an annulment of a marriage. The Rabbanon created a rabbinic marriage, Ishus the Rabbanon, and they allowed for an annulment, which, like a Mekach Tos, removes the Ishus L'Mafreya. And therefore, there's no reason to block Reuven from being Miyabim Rivka. Rivka is not a tzara of an erva. But the Gemara says that there's a Gzeira de Rabbanon. And the Rabbanon are going to say that Saras Bito Hamima'enes is Asura. There's no possibility of Yibum, meaning the Rabbanan are going to prohibit Yibum in the case of Reuven vis-a-vis Rivka, as if Rivka was a Tzaras Erva. The Rabbanan are going to give Rivka, that Tzara, the status of a Tzaras Erva. Why? Because she's the Tzara of Bito Hamima'enes. And in the case of Bito Hamima'enes, it really looks like, in the eyes of the spectator, that Rivka is a Tzaras Erva. They don't know all the nuances, both physical, the physical reality and the nuances of Jewish law, that in fact, Sarah did not fall for Yibum till her father Reuven, even though she was married to Shimon and Shimon died. They don't know that. So in the minds of the spectators, they are looking at what is a Tzaras Bito, meaning that both Sarah and Rivka fell for Yibum with the death of Shimon to Reuven, the father of Sarah. Well, if that's what they understand to be the reality, then if Reuven would go ahead and be Miyabim Saras Bito, which means Rivka, then people will come to the conclusion that Saras Erva lends itself to is included in the parsha of Yidden. And by the way, you might say to me, okay, so they made such a mistake. So there was no mitzvah of Yibum. So it was Makayim the mitzvah of Yibum. Nay, if there's no Yibum, then what is her status? Eishazach. It's not, is there a mitzvah? Is there not a mitzvah? You can tell me, I don't know about if you have this, but I get shilas and mezuzah all the time. I call it the classic what's up shilah. They send me WhatsApp pictures of, the hallway and, where do we put the mezuzah? Sometimes I get it in the video. It's even more sophisticated. They give me a grand tour of the house. So if I would say, okay, you know what? Put up a mezuzah. All right. It's amaratzis if there's no fee of mezuzah, and fault me for being ignorant, but nishkeferla. But when it comes to Yibum, it's not just a question of, there was a Yibum, when there was really no mitzvah of Yibum. That's not the approach, because if there's no mitzvah of Yibum, then we go back to the original erva, and that's called Eishes Achiv Shalom B'Makom Mitzvah, which is Eishes Achiv. So in order to avoid all these issues, they made an outright gzeira that Saras Bito Ma'enes is Asura Ol. So the Gemara asks for Tanan. So let's see if we're all on the same page over here. We are now approximately halfway through the Amud. What Simon could I give you? But Tanan. You see Tosus Dirmasil Tni? Funny? That could be a good sign, because if you drop down approximately 5 lines in that Tosus and you move your finger across to the right, you'll see a line that starts with the word Mima'enes. Yeah? But Tanan, we learned in a Mishnah, this is a Mishnah that started on Daf Beis Amud Aleph and it was like the longest Mishnah in Shas, ended up on Daf Beis Amud Beis. And it says, V'kulon, meaning all the arayos that are mentioned, the 15 arayos, in Mesu, O Me'anu, Soroseyen Mutaros. So now we're talking about an erva that died during the lifetime of her husband. which means that the critical moment to lock in what's called Tsaras Erva is the moment of the death of the brother. If at the moment of the death of the brother, Reuven died, let's say, he had two wives, one of whom was an erva, then you have the halacha of an Isra on the Tzara. But if, on the other hand, the erva herself was out of the picture, unfortunately she died before her husband died, so at the time of the death of Reuven, only the Tzara fell for Yibum. The erva did not fall for Yibum because she's already Nebuch, 6 feet under. So in that case, Mutarasea Mutaris. But the Mishnah adds, O Mian. Now, by the way, I don't know why they point this out. It's so obvious that if the Tzara is Muteres, then the Tzaras Tzara is also Muteres. Because again, Tzaras Tzara in our Mishnah, we spent a lot of time on Tzaras Tzara, is an extension, a branch of Tzara. So if there's no Isur Tzara, then there's no Isur Tzaras. Well, yeah, I mean, that seems to, in my mind, to be obvious. So now the Gemara analyzes the Mishnah. The Mi'ana, the Man. What exactly is the scenario of Mir? Ilema, the Mi'ana, Bibal. If during the lifetime of Reuven, he was married to a Ketana and she was Mema'enes, is Hainu Grusha, then she doesn't fall for Yibum. Let's say there's an Ereva relationship here, right? There's one young girl, a Ketana, who has the status of an Ereva. If she was Mema'enes during the lifetime of Reuven, right, he's the victim of death that sets up Yibum, then Hainu Grusha. I mean, what would have been if Reuven was married to an Erva and then he divorced her during his lifetime? She would be out of the picture entirely. And if that be the case, why would the Mishnah review that which we already know? The Mishnah has already established that if he divorces the Erva, such that now the Tzara alone falls for Yibum after his death, then Misyabenes. Why do you have to add Mi'ana? I mean, it's just a repetition of Grusha. Elalav biyava. By process of elimination, we must assume the Mishnah is addressing a case where, although the deceased did not receive any sort of miyun from this Ketana that he was married to during his lifetime, but immediately after he died, the Mama'enes, meaning the Ketana, comes along and she registers her miyun with regard to the Yavam. Now, let's see what happens now. The Mishnah has a chidush. What is the chidush of the Mishnah? It's not the same as Grusha, because that would be miyun bechaye baila. But now we're talking about miyana l'yavam, meaning after misas baila. And at the moment of the Nefila, we had two tzaras, right? It took a few seconds until, we'll call a Sarah was Mema'enes. During those few fleeting seconds, there was an Nefila for Yibum of both Sarah and her Tzara. And if that be the case, the Tzara should be knocked out and Asura Midin Naishis out from Yibum. What would knock her out from Yibum? She is now at Tzaras Erva. At this moment in time, she's at Tzaras Erva. Again, later, there would be Miyah. And Einat Sarah, Asura. That's the tremendous chiddush in the Mishnah. And what's the underlying, the reasoning could be summarized in one word. What word do I have in mind? Anybody know? Why isn't she a tzara of an Erev? Knock, knock. And here's so many people at once.
There's a meal.
What?
There was a meal.
Oh, but that's not enough. Because again, we wanted to pinpoint the moment, the critical moment of Misa, when Reuven died. Miyun took place when she was Mamanis to Shimon a little bit later, an hour later, a week later, I don't know when. But what word is critical now? Starts with a lamed, ends with an ayin. No go. After the lamed is a mem. Oh, the mafreya. We got it. That the miyun is chala mafreya. That's the entire chiddush of this brisa. We didn't know that miyun was chala mafreya. We've been assuming it, but now we see it. It's implicit. It's almost explicit in this brisa. Or I should say in our Mishnah, really, the way the Gemara is interpreting our Mishnah. The only reason that Rivka is not at Sarah's Erev of Sarah, of little Sarah, is because Miyun is Chala Mafreya, which means that Sarah was in fact never married to Rivka. And therefore, Rivka, that's the Sarah, it was never a Sarah of an Erev. He says, I'm just going to read to you, which you have the Masechet. So we're on Yud Beis with a Beis after, right? In brackets. We're on the left column. At the end of that first paragraph, he writes, Lefi shal yidei amir bayavam nekarim kidushe ames l'mafreya. See, I would have added another word here. I would have said, Nekarim kiduche dirabanan shall ames l'mafreya. Nimtza so hoisa eishes ames liolam. This girl Sarah was never married to Reuven. What do you mean she was never married to Reuven? I was there at the wedding. I was Masechet Yevamot. What do you mean she was never married? And the answer is Nekarim Kiddushe Ames, and here's the key word, Limafreya. Rabosai, if they ever ask you for a halachic application of the concept Limafreya, they stop you on the street. Give me a case of Limafreya. It's very hard to come up with cases of Limafreya. For example, a Tanai, Bittul Tanai is not Limafreya, it's Mikan Lahava. So where do we have Limafreya? There is such a thing as a Tanai Limafreya, in the case of what's called almanas or me'achshav. But as a general rule, cases of l'mafreya are quite rare. Unless you made a mistake. There's something, that was chal, but only because we thought it was chal. So now we found out it wasn't chal. So that's batel l'mafreya. But that's not what l'mafreya is all about. And you've all heard of a famous sugi called breira. If you hold yesh breira, breira works l'mafreya. But again, these are very rare cases. And here we have an example of mafreya, that miyun is chal mafreya, and even though we danced at the wedding, she was never married to him. Is nimtza shalahoisa eisha sames li olam umemela lohoy me olam tzara zu lezu, obviously. Arei lanu. Now we're ready for the proof of the Masechet. Actually, it doesn't say the word Masechet, but the Gemara asks a kasha. The proof of the kasha is that even though we have a case of bito mima enes, is nevertheless she's the tzara's muteris leave. So how can you tell me, and that was the sugya that we learned yesterday of Shmuel, that Saras Bito B'ma Enes is Asura, when the Mishnah itself is predicated on the fact that Miyun operates L'mafreya, to remove the Kedusha. Obviously the Tzara therefore is Muteres, and that's exactly what the Mishnah is telling us, V'tzarosein Mutaros. And now you're telling me that there was some sort of Gzeira D'Rabbanan because it looks like she's a Tzaras Ereva? Okay, now we get to the hard part of the suit. Gemara says, "Lo, Olam B'Baal." Gemara says, "No, we're going to go back to our first suggested possibility in interpreting the Mishnah." And the miyun took place to the Baal. And we asked Hainu Grusha. So the Gemara says, Trey Gavni Gerish. What does this mean, Trey Gavni Gerish? Imagine if a man is married to an Erev in a way that the tzara will be a tzara's Erev. He gives his wife the Erev a get. And the tzara now is misyabenes. How much more so with a billion kal v'chomers in the case of me? First of all, a get is not chal mafreya, it's mikana lahab. And secondly, a get is chal to break up Ish's doraisa. A miyun is on Kedushin D'Rabbanan. And honestly, I drew a blank. I began to think that Trey Gavni Gerich is just a technicality. It's only linguistics. It's like a play on words. You can talk about a Gerishin, you can talk about miyun. And the Mishnah wants to list all of the above. Again, I never understood the rule of the Mishnah. Rebbe did not call me up and confer with me about, what was his literary style. When would he add words to the Mishnah and when would he not? If you would ask me, I would have said, Rebbe, the answer is always not. Meaning if there's ever a question about whether to add a word to the Mishnah or not, leave it out. When in doubt, leave it out. Rebbe, Eisa Sos Hashem, the whole enterprise of committing Torah Sheba'al Peh to writing was an Avera Gedola, but Eisa Sos Hashem. We had no choice. We have something called Chisurei Mechsur, right? What's Chisurei Mechsur? Parts of the Mishnah that were deliberately omitted. So you tell me Trey Gavni Gerish, it's just semantics, I don't get it. You have any footnote on that? I have nothing.
Basically, it's the same thing.
Oh, semantics. It's very disappointing that Rebbe would add a word that has no conceptual chidush to it in halachic terms, just because he wants to cover, the semantics. If we had a third case of Gerishim, but was slightly different, then it would be mentioned in the Mishnah as well. I don't have another case. I only have Gerishim and miyun. I mean, you could have Mekach Tos, but I guess that's not Gerish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Different.
Yeah, but they're different in which direction? Meaning, different and to give you more of a havmina that tzara should fall for Yibum, or less of a ground to stand on that the tzara should be chayv. I think it's less than a ground. But maybe you have another perspective, Steve. What do you?
I'm just saying. I mean, it's who initiates it. Is going to.
Oh, you're saying in the Tzuras Ma'aser Gerushin,
right? Right. So
I was focused on the Totza'ah. The bottom line is, after it's all said and done, the relationship between, let's call him Shimon and Sarah was, terminated. And he, so you're saying, but it's a different.
Just to recognize that.
Now let's take a look at the next one. This is already exciting. Listen to this. Gemara asks the following question. Umayshna ki be'ana be, I'm going to add the word chaye baal. Right now, we're going back to the original interpretation that the miyun took place during the life of the Baal. and it's just a substitute semantically for gerich. Akrinu l'nesuin. And therefore the tzara falls for Yibam. She's not a tzara's erva because already during his lifetime, the relationship between the erva and the future deceased, if I can use that term, was severed. And therefore, kimiano biyavam nami nisuin kamoi ka'akra. Why should it be? Why should it be any different? In other words, the Gemara in this question is assuming an equation between Miyana Bebala and Miyana Biyava. Because again, the Gemara is now defending Shmuel. Shmuel was of the opinion that Tzaras Bito Mima Enes is Asura. Why? If she was Mima Enes in, I forget the name, is it Reuven or Shimon? I always get confused. Let's call Reuven. If she was Mima Enes in Reuven during his lifetime, then Reuven's other wife, we call her Rivka, certainly is Misyab Emes. So what difference it made? If there was Miyun to Shimon, meaning after Reuven died, she was Ma'anis to Shimon, that also should be Oker the Nesuin L'Mafreya, and therefore the Tzara, namely Rivka, is not a Tzara's Arab. But the Gemara seems to be oblivious to the Gzera D'Rabbana. Meaning, since at the moment of Reuven's death, this Sarah fell for Yibam, although true, later she was Memaenes, but if we focus all our attention on that critical moment of Shimon, of Reuven's death, then she fell for Yibam to Shimon, and therefore the Tzara is the Tzara's Arab. Now, one of the achronim called the Malo HaRoim is quoted here in note Yud Zayin. I'm not sure if he's asking exactly our question, but I think it's very similar. Iksha Malo HaRoim. Ma b'kach shenekorim anisuin l'mafreya. Okay, you're right, that we'll accept your analogy, and both me and B'chai Bal or me and B'yavam both operate in the same way to undermine and completely disqualify the Kedusha L'Mafreya. But nevertheless, although sof b'shas nefila, in the case of Miud to the Yavam, b'shas nefila nesra olam mishum tzaras erev. So again, the Malo HaRoim is accepting the Mafreya in both cases, the Mafreya in classic Miyun and the Mafreya in Miyun to the Yavam. In both cases, it's Oker the Nesuin the Mafreya. He doesn't deny it. But he says that she was at Tzaras Erev at one point in time. So again, I don't know if he's asking our question that the spectator might misunderstand what's going on. Then he writes, Kaimalan kol Yevama she'inani kori ba b'shas nefila Yevama yavo leo arei hi keishes akshish l'vada basur lavo gana. Yeah, but again, here's a case of the Mafreya. Let's see what he has. V'tirtzu shelo nemar klal zeh elo kishe'ein biyad hayavam o hayavama lahatir es ha'isa shechal b'shas nefila. Anshi Yechola Yevama Lahatir Sarasa Al Yidei Hamiyun Lo Mikri O Venesra Shari Milchatchili Omeres Lios Niteris. He's asking that question because if he were, then his answer would not really solve the problem. Meaning his question is very similar to ours. Shas Nefila, Rivka was a tzarser, and Einani Koriba b'Shas Nefila. Yevama and Kol Yevama Sheinani Koriba b'Shas Nefila. Yevama Yovel Lea Harikeishis Achshelo Makom Mitzvah. Like for example, you could have a case where two brothers marry two sisters, and one brother dies without children, and she's an Eshisaka, and there's another Sarah. And then later on, the Yavam's wife dies. So in such a case, we're not gonna recreate the Hebrew. Yeah, but again, there's no Lumafreya. She definitely was the Shas Misa. She was the Tsaras Arab. Here, there's no Nesuin Lumafreya.
And the problem is, the Sarah is in limbo until the Hannah decide. If she never does even, then the Sarah should go off and marry somebody else.
I agree
but at the
with
moment, 10 years later, whenever she decides to meet him, then it's like all of a sudden,
right.
So
it could be that the answer to your question, there are many dimensions to your question, but as far as one dimension, it could be that we'll give her a choice right now. I am inclined to think, but I can't prove it yet. I hope I'll be able to prove it, is that we don't need her formal meal. The very fact that because there's an error. She doesn't have a possibility of continuing that marriage relationship. That's an automatic built-in. But there's no doubt that the Malach Graham is saying that since Miyun is at the Shas Nisa is a viable option, and there's nothing blocking it. It's not like, something could happen later on. But at the Shas Nisa, we already have a built-in removal, a mechanism to remove the Ichus to the Erva. Therefore, we don't apply this principle of Kol She'ein. I always forget the language. Einani Kori B'Shas Misa Nefil Yibum Yivam Yovel Keishes Akol Shlom Makom. But I'm still perturbed. Why? We were always talking about Gzeira D'Rabbanan. Where did the Gzeira D'Rabbanan disappear? I don't know. Maybe it'll come up later in the sugya. I don't know. Yeah, maybe it's going to come up later in the sugya because I see, my eye is moving ahead a few lines, and I see something called nires. Do you see that word nires a few lines later? Nires kitsaras bito. All right. Anyway, we'll see. So the Gemara says, Mishum de Tani Rami Bar Yechezkel. The Tani Rami Bar Yechezkel, man of the Baal Muteres Li Ovid. Man of the Baal Muteres Li Ovid. 1 second. Let's take a look at Kuf Yud Aleph. That's on the bottom left. What happened? Yaakov ben Shimon. I'm sorry. Yaakov ben Shimon. Benasa Shimon es Sarah. He is Sarah Katan. Means the two Rabban. Umiana Sarah bis Shimon. The Okar v'kach es hanesuin lemafreya. Re Sarah muteres liYaakov. Wow, that's really interesting. Here's another quiz question you could ask a guy walking down the street. When could a father-in-law marry his own daughter? And the answer is when she was married off to his son with Kiddushay Miyun, and she was Mama'enes in his son. Now he can marry his former daughter. Wow, that's good.
Really wasn't a fool.
So Mafreya, of course, since Miyun works in Mafreya, they would never marry. But I'm just saying, it's really a little shocking when you think about it. I mean, we're not worried about spectators. Yeah, the spectators can say, hey, what's going on here? Why is Reuven marrying the wife of his son, his daughter? So Miana Bebal Muteres Li of. So the father-in-law can marry his daughter. But be Yavam. Okay, he calls that Kuf Yud Beis. Surely of Yud Beis is on the next page. The Yaakov Shnei Bonim, Ruvain v'Shimon. Nasa Shimon es Sarah. Shehi Yisoma Ketana Nesui D'Rabbanan. Shimon lo Bonim v'Nafla Sarah Lifnei Yava Ruvain liYibum. Umiana Sarah Yevamot. So she was Mama'enes in Reuven. I'm kind of awkward because my phrase said, "Soon Chenisa l'Shimon." Af Kevan Ach Kevan she Kvar Nofla l'Yibum Koach Nisuin Elu Mires Shel Shim Sural Yak. You know what he's saying? This really also touches on Zika a little bit. What do I mean? The very fact that she fell for evil, that already looks like she's married to the son of Yaakov. So again, I think we're dealing with the Rabbanans here. You agree with me? Kevan shekvar nafal libu mikoch nesuin elu. Nireis keishto shel Shimon. Again, Shimon is gone already. But his marriage to Sarah is also gone, but it doesn't look like it's gone because there was an afila liyibum. Again, it comes back to our discussion, meaning that there was a moment in time when everything was sort of suspended in midair and there was an afila for yibum. What are we afraid of? Are we afraid of Halasso because of Shimon or Halasso because of Reuven? I think he means Shimon, right? Oh, Nireis Keishto Shel Shimon. He says it black and white. But in a case where there was miyut b'chaye habal, then it doesn't. It's not Nireis Kekalos. Interesting. again, it all sounds so technical, sort of, it sounds almost psychological. I wonder if it goes beyond psychology. Psychology is that if a woman fell for Yibum, some people will think that marriage can never be, it doesn't lend itself to retroactive uprooting of the marriage. But if there was classic miyun during the lifetime of the husband, then everybody sort of understands that they weren't married, and the father could marry his own ex-daughter. It's not his daughter. See, what I'd love to say here, but I don't know how to go with this, that there are two categories of lemafreya. Just give me a minute. Is there any way? Could it be that there's a straight lemafreya and there's a from now on lemafreya? Straight lemafreya means that they were never married. I mean, here she's with Shimon, right? Who is it? We said with Shimon, right? She's with Shimon, living together with him, but now she's mema'enes. So in such a case, that's called the straight lemafreya. They were never married. But if we work with lemafreya in a different way, that lemafreya means that after the occurrence, which is mevatel the chalos, after that takes place, now we call it lemafreya. But it's not a straight lemafreya. It's only from now it's lemafreya. You follow what I'm saying? What I'm saying is that if you have a marriage relationship which terminates with miyun, that's a straight lemafreya. At that moment of miyun, I completely undermine the marriage from its very inception, and that's lemafreya. Then there's a more complicated lemafreya, where we say legally from a certain point of time and on, we consider it lemafreya. But within that time period itself, it wasn't lemafreya. It's only now becomes lemafreya. And what would push me in that direction is yibum. What do I mean? If there was an afila for yibum, then that grabs a moment of time. And it says, well, she was married to Shimon, Shimon's gone, and now she falls for yibum to Reuven. And I could, frame that moment of time and call it a yibum moment. Now she goes ahead and she's mema'enes in Shimon. Okay, now we'll call it lemafreya. But I can't change and I can't undo what was done. I mean, the nefila for yibum was a halachic entity, and it was predicated on an existing ishus. So to now allow the father to marry him, that I can't do because now lemafreya changed. It's a different kind of lemafreya. You understand? What I'm trying to do is take this into an abstract world, and it's not just pure psychology. It's not just a question of, do I understand? Do I not understand? What will the spectator think? And well, what do you mean she fell for Yibum? That Yibum never materialized. So, in fact, we were Oker, the lemafreya had the entire base on which the whole Yibum was generated. There's nothing there. But the answer is, now there's nothing there. But I can't change the fact that at the moment of his death, there wasn't a field for Yibum. So there's like a Shnei Mamachishin said. One line wants to go backwards, but one line is, how should I say, steeped and anchored deep in the mud. You can't remove it. There wasn't a field for Yibum. So let's see. Mishum the Tani Rami Bar Yecheskel. Tani Rami Bar Yecheskel Me'ano Bibal Muteresli of, but Biyavam Asurali of Alma Ishas Nefila Nireis kikalos. Oh, so maybe the nireis kikaloso means that because there wasn't a fila for yibum, that itself pushes us to recognize and validate that marriage relationship. Because the fila for yibum was a, Paul Yotze of that marriage relationship. And even though now, today, she is mema'enes, which means she now is removing Lamafreya, the marriage to Shimon, so therefore she's no longer Kalosa. Nevertheless, we're going to consider her as Kalosa because she's Nireis Kikalosa. What does Nireis Kikalosa mean? That we can't apply Lamafreya in the way we want to apply Lamafreya. Again, we're not rejecting Lamafreya. We don't have the license, the luxury to reject Lamafreya. There is Lamafreya. That's how Miyun works. Miyun works Lamafreya. And it works Lamafreya even for the Yama. But it can only work Lamafreya from now on, but it cannot affect that moment in time before the Miyun took place. Before the Miyun took place, there was a halachic recognition, so to speak, that like Kilu activate to press the button of this marriage. The marriage is activated. Otherwise, there's no nefila for evil. So since at that moment in time, there was a poel yotze of the issues, the issues actually materialized in what we call a halachic nefila for evil. Therefore, we cannot apply Lamafreya in a straight way. You're going to have to use a limited Lamafreya, not the ultimate Lamafreya, not a total Lamafreya, but only a partial Lamafreya. And that's called Nireis Kikalos. Okay, now let's swing back to our case. Ochinami. Now we get to Tzaras Bito Mema'enes. And again, the Miyun is going to establish that the Tzara was never a Tzara because there was never a relationship to the Bito, to the Erva. Is Mishas Nefila Nireis Kitzaras Bito. Right, the Bas of Reuven fell for Yibum together with the Tzara. That means Shimon's other wife. We called her Rivka. And at that moment, there was an Nefila Yibum because the Miyun takes place later. You'll ask me, but when the Miyun took place, it turns out she was never married to Shimon, and therefore this girl is not a Tzara. Is not a right. She's not an Erva who's a Tzara. I mean, she's an Erva, but she doesn't fall for Yibum to Reuven because Lamafreya, we are undermining and vitiating the Kedushin. But it doesn't matter because since there wasn't a field for Yibum, we apply the principle of Nireis Kikalos. Here it's Nireis Kitzaras Bito. And again, you can choose for yourself. You want to, explain this in psychological terms that, the onlooker says, well, it looks like, when Shimon died, we brought in all his wives, including this young girl, and we lined them up, and we were, ready to go forward with either Yibum or Chalitza, and now all of a sudden we're going to allow, Reuven to be the Yabim Rivka, the Tzara. What do you mean? That she's a Tzara of his own daughter, Sarah. He's a Tzara's Bito. So that's a psychological approach. And I admit that could be closer to the text itself. But I think if you want to take it on a conceptual level, maybe we're talking about two different modus vivendi, two different operational systems for Lamafreya. Sometimes Lamafreya means it never happened, period. Other times Lamafreya says, let's consider it now in the light of the new event as if it never happened. So it'd be interesting. Now I'm thinking out loud. What would be if a man gave Kiddushin to a woman al Tnan? Second, he gave Kiddushin to a woman al Tnai in a way that if there's a bittul al Tnai, then Lemafreya, it was never a Kiddushin. Are you with me? Okay. Now he dies. And he leaves no children, but a living brother. Did she fall for Yibum? Because that which has to be Oker the Kedusha L'Mafreya has not yet happened. So at the moment of Nefila for Yibum, she's the wife of the deceased, if you follow what I mean. Later on, X happens, like her father puts him in jail, or I don't know what, whatever the tie was. And L'Mafreya, there was never Ishus. And again, this will be an afkamina for the tzara. It won't be an afkamina for her herself, because we're going to be okay the kedusha l'mafreya. But what about Nire's kitzaras erevos? And one could ostensibly argue that since something has to happen to torpedo the kedusha from its inception, that the nefila for Yibum freezes it. It sets up a barrier that doesn't allow me to apply the mafreya. Again, we will apply the mafreya. And obviously this woman will not be a candidate for Yibum. That's no shiloh. She was never married to him. But I'm going to consider it that she was never married to him from the moment that we torpedoed the kedusha. Because whatever happened, happened. And that occurrence creates a partial or a limited lemafreya. It's a lemafreya that's going to be relevant now, and we're going to consider it lemafreya. What would be in such a case? Let's say he gave a get to his wife. Can she marry a Kohen? That would be interesting. But if we're going to say lemafreya, so she was never married to begin with, so obviously the get is meaningless, and she can marry a Kohen. But if on the other hand we're saying that since it was, let's say, it was a Masechet Gerushin, I don't know, maybe a Masechet Gerushin itself is similar halachically to a nefila for Yibum. So we went through the whole rigmarole of writing up a get, signing to Eidim on a get, delivering the get. At that point, we are recognizing the issues. But later on, something happens that removes the Kedusha L'Mafreya. So now the get turns out to be meaningless, and therefore she should be able to marry a Kohen. Or do we say no? Only from that moment on, we can consider it L'Mafreya, but she was a Grusha at one point in time, and that's enough to pass her for a Kohen. I don't know. You can go with this in many different directions. All right. Now, it's been a little bit of time since we took a look in the Yalkut HaBi'urim. So obviously, we don't have time to really take on a new mountain, so to speak. But I just want to maybe spend a few minutes trying to sift this out. And maybe we can focus on this tomorrow. Today is what, Wednesday? Yeah. So I think the last thing that we actually did inside was on Daf Pei, or maybe we got to Pei Aleph. I don't remember. I think it was Pei. It was a famous Rashba on Pei. I'm not excluding that, but. And in a certain sense, the challenge of Yalkut HaBi'urim at this point in our lives could be a chazara. You know what I mean? There's additional dividends that'll force us to review what we've hopefully not long ago forgotten, but maybe we have forgotten. I was curious about the machlokas between Rav and Rav, who is it? Rav Yochanan Reish Lakish. Is there anything here on that? Because that was a very profound. You know what I mean? A chalutza, whether she becomes only chayvei lavin to all the other brothers and to the tsaros, or no, she remains eshes ah. What's the status of chalutza? Can we find anything about that? Well, what's the last page you have? Okay. Oh, you don't even have pay? No, you definitely have pay.
I haven't.
You didn't make a copy of pay? I thought we did.
I mean, we did something there, but it was. Yeah.
Oh, Omar Shlokish. See if this is it. This is on pay Aleph. Omar Shlokish. Who ein chayav ala chalutza kares? The Torah downgraded. We called it a nituk halav vis-a-vis the choletz himself. So if he were to marry his chalutza, it would only be a violation of a lav. The achim chayavim ala chalutza kares. As far as the achim is concerned, it's as if she had never fallen for yibum for them, and therefore she goes back into the status of HSA. That's Reish Lakish. So I see he has a piece on Reish Lakish going on to pay Beis. Oh, and he goes on here in a section on pay Beis called Bir Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish the Achim Ubitzaros. And that's where we introduced the svara of Reish Lakish, that the choletz is really shliach on behalf of all the other brothers. I mean, it's just coincidental that he was the one who stepped forward and volunteered to implement the chalitza. It could have been any of the brothers. And therefore, the status of the chalutza has to be uniform for all the brothers if he's operating just on their half. So he has something called Iu Shlichusa Diachin Ka'ovid to explain Rabbi Yochanan. So this is good. This is good. So let's just make a little note of this. We'll take, again, I'm not promising what we'll have time for, what we won't, but if you don't mind photocopying pay Aleph, and pay Beis. That's 3 pages. I mean, I'm hoping the machine is working. I can't guarantee that, like all of my technological undertakings. Tonight, I'm going to give a shiur, and I want to do screen sharing. I have no clue how to do that, but I have between now and 9 o'clock at night to figure out how to do screen sharing. Because I want to teach a text, and I have no doubt that the people who join my shiur on Zoom, we have about 5 guys, I don't think they have access to that text. So the only way I can successfully point out what I want to point out is doing screen sharing. Is that what it's called? And that's itself an achievement for me. If I know that there's such a thing out there called screen, and I can call it by its name, that I don't know how to do it, but at least. So that's that. If you want to do pay Gimel, depending upon what kind of time you have. Okay then.
But you don't need it. You get it.
Right. If you're doing an extra one anyway, that it saves me. Okay then. That's what we have. All right. Everyone should have a great day.